Yeah, I think like I've never not done a film in Indonesian, and I think all of my films they reflect why I'm doing this in the first place, or why I got into writing and directing, why I got into filmmaking was because there's a lot of stuff that I wanted to say, and I felt like film was the best medium for that. So being Indonesian, I guess there's a lot of stereotypes, or there's a lot of expectations or body standards that are held against upon you. And it's very much connected to intergenerational trauma, or like what your parents expected of you, what your grandparents expected of you. But there's also like the Asian body standard, and I think that's coming from a lot specifically from the Indonesian culture. But it's also there's also a lot of irony within it, because a lot of family members would like keep telling you to keep eating, and then but at the same time question you of like why you're getting so fat when they keep pushing you to keep eating. But yeah, I guess one thing that I really wanted to highlight was we don't really recognize mental health in Indonesia, or like the topics or the discussion of it is very much taboo. There's a lot of cases in Indonesia where like if you think you have depression, or if you think you have a mental health issue or disorder, the country or the state kind of sees it as like, oh, you're into witchcraft, and then they punish you for it in really violent ways. So there's definitely not a safe space to talk about it, or like if like you have it, people just think like, oh, you're ungrateful for what you have, and like you're not really appreciative or what you have, like you like. Or a lot of people think like, oh, if you were going to see a therapist, like you don't have faith, or like you don't believe in God, because it's like, oh, you're thinking of like killing yourself, you must not have a faith you could lean on. So it's definitely very much a very sensitive subject, and one that I wanted to treat it like delicately. That's why through my film, I didn't want to do like a standard narrative drama, which I feel like there's nothing wrong with that, but I just needed like the metaphor, or like some sort of like storytelling device, like the body horror genre, to help communicate that in a more subtle way, but still like packs a punch or delivers. It just started with me being very honest with them. Like all the conversations started with like, okay, so this is based on my personal story, and this is based on my personal experience. So I started with that. I started with how I was feeling in the pandemic, and I started with like how it led up to my eating disorder, and how this happened, and how it was ironically impacted by a lot of like my upbringing, and how like there's a certain standard that I have to hold up to. And while I know these are the people that are just looking out for me, and people who wants the best for me, but it can also be harmful in a way, and they understand that because they're also the Indonesian diaspora, meaning they are very affiliated, or they're very familiar with the Indonesian culture, but they have the opportunity to being removed from it, like living in North America, that they do have more of a wider perspective on the matter, that they know that there's not only one way to seeing it. So they definitely understand like where I'm coming from, and like the toxic impacts of like these types of cultures. So they're definitely comfortable talking about it, and they know where I'm coming from with it, and they're very much supportive of like trying to break the stigma. So I think it was mostly like just connecting from a human base, like the basis of being a human being, and then you can basically go from there like as characters, because you just really need something to connect to like personally, and the rest will follow. The actors who have not been on set, they don't really need much coaching, because what happens is like you kind of already get everything through the standard protocol on set. Basically, for example, like if you go through blocking, and then you go through lighting, go through rehearsal, like with blocking itself, like you're making the like both the actors and the non-actors like comfortable to the environment, like introducing them, like where you start, where you end. Like it's actually not very different how I would treat an actor and a non-actor, because like the standard procedures on set like already does that for them. And I also do rehearsals before that with them, and I treat them very like basically the same way. I don't treat them any differently, because I don't feel like they need a different approach. Actually, the only difference that I could see is actually like my more seasoned actors or the one that are more comfortable, they also help me like tell the other actors stuff. So like it's small stuff of like shh, like don't talk, like wait, or something. Some things just get lost in translation. Like sometimes they would like start acting before I call action, and so like the seasoned actor would just have to tell them like no, you have to wait till like she calls action. So it's small stuff like that, not stuff that like are super harmful to like the production or anything. So it's just the small things like that. And sometimes like the seasoned actor also like helps like fish lines out of like other more non-actors to get more of a natural performance out of them. So that's always helpful. Yeah, so it's actually an Indonesian composer based in Vancouver, and he plays and he's actually a shadow puppeteer. So he plays gamelan and he plays a lot of Indonesian instruments. He was, I think at a certain point of his life, he was like the royal like musician for the palace in Indonesia. And then he started teaching like music in UBC in British Columbia, and he had a lot of traditional instruments, and he used to score films too for like an Indonesian filmmaker called Garin Nugroho. So he was very familiar with the process. Like we just sat him down in the sound studio booth and we played him the previews, and he just like live composed it with like all of his instruments, and then that's what we popped into the timeline.